Hi everyone, Jensen here again. So the last video that I published on Fitts Law got such an amazing response. So thank you so much for your comments and your subscribes. And there were some really interesting stories that I wanted to put into the video, but they just didn't fit in the script. I couldn't figure out how to work it in. And so today I wanted to go off the record, a little behind the scenes, and tell you a few of the really interesting stories that couldn't quite make it fit into the video, including a few about my time designing software at Microsoft and how we used Fitts Law. If you haven't watched the last video on Fitts Law yet, get caught up. I'll put a link down in the description. Check that video out first, and then come back here and join the discussion. So the first thing someone asked in the comments, and this is a really small thing, but I thought it was kind of interesting, is why is it called Fitts Law and not Fitts's Law? And the reality is I have no idea. My entire career I've heard people say Fitts Law, and I guess by proper English pronunciation, I guess it should be Fitts's Law. But I've always heard it as Fitts Law. So Fitts Law it is in my video. And if you want to call it Fitts's Law, well, knock yourself out. So now I want to talk for a second about Microsoft Windows and the Start button. So I mentioned last time that the Start button is kind of like this panacea of easy to clickness. It's in the corner, so you can just take your mouse, slam it into the lower left-hand corner, hit the button, and the menu comes up, which seems like it should be perfect for ease of targeting and for efficiency. The problem is the sad truth that it actually didn't work like that for almost 10 years after Windows 95 came out. So a little bit of history. The Start button was introduced as part of this new user interface that was brought to the world in Windows 95. And the button was in the place you're used to it, in the lower left-hand corner. But there was a problem. The button, though it looked like it was in the corner, wasn't in the corner. It was almost in the corner. And almost doesn't get the job done when it comes to Fitts Law. The Start button was surrounded by a few dead pixels to the left and to the bottom. Space that was there to make the button look more balanced in the taskbar, but that made the actual corner unclickable. And so people would slam their mouse down into the corner, click, and then nothing would happen. Now this ended up being a whole bunch of customer support calls for Microsoft that they couldn't figure out. People were saying, I'm literally clicking the button and the Start menu's not opening. They couldn't figure it out. They couldn't figure it out. And in fact, they didn't fix this for many years. They didn't fix it in Windows 98. It didn't make its way into the consumer operating system that Microsoft made until Windows XP, when they finally expanded the button all the way to the edge and made it clickable to get that Fitts Law magic. And so that was like a mystery that only got solved many years later. Now, when I worked on the user interface of Microsoft Office, which was what my team was responsible for, back when we were working on a new version of Office called Office 2007, which brought a new user interface called the Ribbon, which you may have used. We had this idea that we wanted to use Fitts Law to make it super easy to click on certain commands. In particular, we had grouped all of the commands together in Microsoft Word and Excel and PowerPoint that were about the document. Things like saving it, opening it, closing it, printing it. And we grouped those all together, and we had this idea that if we put them up in the upper left-hand corner, that they would be super easy to click. And at least when the app was maximized, you could just slam your mouse up there, boom, hit the button. But what we found was for an app to have a button that was visually present in the corner looked super weird. It just looked awkward. I don't know what else to say. So what we did was we made this round button that had the Office logo in it, and we put it up in the upper left-hand corner, and we made the virtual click target all the way clickable to the edge. And so you could just wham your mouse up into the corner, hit the button. And even though it looked like you were just clicking on random dead space, the button still opened and the menu came open. This never felt like a very elegant solution. It was awkward. It still didn't look that good. People had trouble discovering it, which maybe I'll talk about in a future video. And so in the next version of Microsoft Office 2010, we just got rid of that idea altogether. and gave up on the Fitts Law affordance and just made it a button, essentially, that said File, that looked like the rest of the ribbon tabs. So that was a little bit of a trial and fail of using Fitts Law inside of Microsoft Office. If you're interested in hearing more stories about creating the user interface for Microsoft Office, or in fact, Microsoft Windows or Surface or any of the other products, put something you're interested in down in the comments and maybe I can cover it in a future video. So one last little story that I would feel remiss if I didn't share with you, and this concerns Fitts's team in the Air Force that I mentioned in the last video back in World War II. So Fitts, as I mentioned, had a team. And on this team was another person who ended up becoming a sort of really famous person in human factors named Alphonse Chapanis, or Chapanis. I'm not sure exactly. And this guy ended up actually being really important because he worked for the Bell Telephone Company, designing the first touch-tone phones. So the push button layout for phones, he came up with that, helped make sure that it was usable. And he was responsible for working on this problem of why are all the planes crashing. And there was another problem that I didn't mention in the last video, which was that at the beginning of World War II, the United States military only had 3,000 planes. And over the next 5 years of the war, they built more than 300,000 planes. So they were building planes everywhere. Washington, Missouri, South Carolina, Maine, Pennsylvania, aircraft manufacturers all over the place, all building their own planes with their own control surfaces and no regulation of how those surfaces should look, how a throttle control should look in one plane versus another. So what Alphonse figured out was that actually by standardizing controls, we could make these planes more usable, make it easier to move from one plane to another. And in fact, he came up with a principle that ended up being used really everywhere in the next 100 years called shape coding. And the idea behind shape coding is that you make the shape of a distinct control or object, you make the shape of it distinct as well. So imagine, for instance, the throttle might feel like a sort of round bulbous control, but the flaps might feel like a triangle switch that you pull up. That's shape coding. You make the shape encode the function so that it's easy to learn it. And of course, in usability today, in software and in hardware, we know that making alike things look and feel alike is key to people being able to learn them quickly and to adapt to new things quickly. And so this was really the very beginning of figuring that out. So Fitts's team had a lot of impact beyond just what I mentioned in the last video, in terms of really understanding and creating some of the principles of what we would think of today as usability or human interface design. So that's all I have for today, just a few behind the scenes fun stories that I wanted to share. I am hard at work on the next video. If you have ideas at the intersection of design and tech, of things you want to make sure I cover, please put your idea in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you, and I am making a list of future video topics, and so maybe I can get to yours next. It would mean a ton to me if you consider subscribing to the channel. It would make my heart full of gladness and hope. And take a screenshot of your subscriber number when you do subscribe and hold on to that. We are going to use that down the road for something a little bit secret. So that's all I have for now. Thanks, as always, for watching.